remember standing there in that small Edinburgh church, the kind where every breath gathers its own faint echo, and somewhere outside a lone piper threaded a tune through the morning air. I had prepared a yes, a steady, wholehearted yes. I'd walked around Stockbridge for weeks, letting it settle between the bookshop downstairs and my own quiet kitchen. But when the minister finally asked, "Will you take?" and my voice answered firmly, "Yes," my body offered an unmistakable wordless no. A clean shock, almost electric. Not doubt, not panic. Just a moment where my physical self refused to move in the same direction as my chosen self. There was a small pause, one of those strange moments when the air seems to thin. And later, as I stood with my bouquet half wilting in my hands, I wondered, what does one do with a yes from the heart and a no from the body? I'm Dr. Iona A. Blichus, and I've spent most of my adult life studying how people organise themselves, families, villages, cities, states. My training is split between anthropology and political theory, which means I look at relationships the way I once looked at civic institutions, as small, fragile systems that somehow hold whole worlds together. And truly, the smallest political unit we have is not the individual, it's the dyad, the two-person field where expectations, fears, tenderness, and power quietly negotiate with one another. Commitment, in that sense, isn't just romantic, it's constitutional. It's the quiet architecture that lets two people build something that lasts longer than the moment they're standing in. Today, I want to suggest something that sounds counterintuitive in a culture obsessed with keeping options open. That freedom isn't the absence of limits, but the result of choosing them. We tire ourselves not by committing, but by hovering at the edge of every possibility. Aristotle had language for this. He wrote about the movement from potential to act. And without commitment, you stay suspended in potential, which is strangely exhausting. You become a person who is always almost loving, almost choosing, almost arriving. Before we go to Sartre, I want to ground the word commitment itself. Its roots are oddly juridical. To commit once meant to entrust or even to place something in custody. Later it became tied to vows, promises, loyalties, to the idea that your word can shape a future, not just describe one. Commitment sits across three registers. The institutional, where a marriage contract or civil partnership ties you into a recognized structure. The linguistic, where saying, "I promise," creates a world that now includes that promise. And the existential, where commitment becomes less about paperwork and more about the shape of your character. Whether you're married or merely making weekend plans, you're somewhere on that spectrum. I find it helpful to think of relationships not as two categories, married or not, but as a continuum of commitments. At one end lie the formal, weight-bearing structures, the wedding, the legal contract, the public promise. In the middle, the informal but very real agreements we make, exclusivity, long-term planning, the decision to keep turning toward one another week after week. And at the other end, the existential commitments. I am someone who keeps my word. I am someone who shows up. I am someone who doesn't disappear when intimacy asks more of me than I'd planned. These aren't about law. They're about identity, about who you become by choosing someone. Now, Sartre. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher who, famously, could see more than one perspective because he literally had a wandering eye. He worked across forms, novels, plays, heavy philosophical texts, political essays, and he lived what he wrote. Sartre was allergic to abstraction that stayed abstract. He insisted that freedom must show up in choices, behaviours, relationships, politics. He refused the Nobel Prize because he wanted to remain unclaimed by any institution. Say what you will, but he didn't hide behind theories. He tested them in the world. Sartre believed we are, as he put it, condemned to be free. Condemned because there is no higher authority to tell us whom to be or how to choose. Freedom comes with 3 burdens: the openness that produces anxiety, the aloneness that accompanies responsibility, and the despair of acting without guarantees. If commitment has a cost, this is it. That your yes becomes yours alone. No fate, no stars, no divine script to blame. And in relationships that can feel like standing on a cliff edge, even when you're with someone you love. Let me bring in 4 Sartrean ideas and translate them into dating and relationships. First, radical freedom. You are always choosing. Even not choosing is a choice. Saying, I'm not the relationship type is a choice. Saying, I don't know what I want for 3 years is a choice. Commitment, then, is the moment you stop outsourcing your freedom to circumstance. You say, this is what I'm choosing. Second, mauvaise foi, French for bad faith. This is the lie we tell ourselves to avoid the weight of choice. It shows up in roles. I'm just avoidant. I'm simply too independent. I'm terrible at monogamy. It shows up in timing. It's just not the right moment. Work is too intense. Let's keep it fluid. These might contain truths, but often they're shields against deciding. I've watched people stay in these so-called situationships for years under the flag of freedom, when in fact they're simply afraid to close a door and see who they become. Third, love as a meeting of freedoms. We want the other to choose us freely, but we also want that choice to last forever. And sometimes we try to freeze the other person's freedom through jealousy, control, little tests, anything to make the relationship feel guaranteed. But the cost of love is this: the other remains free. They can leave, and still you choose them. That's commitment, not possession, but courage. Fourth, engagement. Sartre's insistence that thought must materialize in action. In relationships, that means your yes is not a mood, it's a practice. It's the email you send, the apology you make, the date you keep, the effort you renew. You can't think your way into being a committed partner. You have to enact it, day after day, in the small, unglamorous spaces where love actually lives. And these lead us to the cost of commitment. First, choosing one path means saying no to others. A relationship is always a narrowing, but a chosen narrowing. Second, visibility. Once you commit, people can hold you to your word. Third, the loss of the fantasy of endless options, which is, if we're honest, a delicious fantasy, right until it becomes a cage. And fourth, you choose someone who remains free. That's the trembling edge of intimacy. You give your heart to someone who does not owe you forever. Now, let me make Sartre practical. Not choosing is still choosing. If you linger in a situationship telling yourself you're seeing where it goes, you're already choosing a form of relationship, one built on ambiguity. If you hide behind roles, I'm just like this, you're using identity as a shield. If you call constant openness freedom, check whether it's actually fear wearing a bohemian jacket. And if you find yourself longing for someone to prove they're safe before you risk choosing them, well, that's a universal wish, but it's not how freedom works. Now, Sartre and de Beauvoir, whose partnership tested these ideas in the real, messy world. They forged what they called their necessary love, central, lifelong, intellectually equal, and allowed for contingent loves around it. They rejected the bourgeois marriage model, yet lived a deep, demanding bond until death. They were buried together, They were also jealous, wounded, sometimes careless with others. Their life is both inspiration and cautionary tale. Freedom doesn't make anyone angelic. It simply reveals the truth of who they choose to be. A quick exercise, my version of a micro-ritual. Take a slow breath in. Name one sentence you've been avoiding in your dating life. Something clean. I want us to be exclusive. I'm not looking for a relationship. I want more time with you. Say it aloud, not to anyone else yet, just to yourself. Feel the small tremor of honesty and the dignity that comes with it. Breathe out. Commitment begins with telling the truth somewhere, even if it's only in your own kitchen. And now, let me return to that moment in the church. My yes was real. My no was real. Both were part of the cost, because commitment isn't the elimination of fear. It's the decision to carry fear with steadiness. The body sometimes reacts to the gravity of a promise, especially one that stretches forward through time. And sometimes that reaction is simply telling you, this matters. It's not a sign to run. It's a sign you are awake. To draw the threads together, commitment stands opposite abandonment, not as obligation, but as chosen limitation. It's the bridge from potential to act. Sartre reminds us we cannot escape our freedom, nor the responsibility that comes with it. Formal commitments outsource some steadiness to institutions. Informal ones rely more on your character. Both require courage, and neither guarantees comfort. Sartre and de Beauvoir teach us that even the most brilliant minds can struggle in love. They weren't deities. They were humans with blind spots and bruises. Commitment doesn't spare you from conflict. It simply gives you a container big enough to hold it. If conflict is your reason for avoiding commitment, you'll avoid every form of depth that relationships offer. So let me leave you with this. The problem of commitment comes down to the question whether or not you refuse to risk the cost of commitment by committing to nothing at all. And nothing in the long run may cost more. Love asks for courage. Not perfection, not certainty, just the willingness to step forward while still feeling the tremble. Where do you want to say yes? And what cost are you willing to bear for that yes? You don't need to become Sartre or de Beauvoir, but at some point you will need to offer someone a real yes or a real no. This is Iona A. Blichus for datingacademy.com, signing off with the first episode in our series on commitment. In the next episodes, we will explore the possibility of commitment, what becomes available once you dare to choose. Please like and subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Keep asking, keep sharing.